Another tip that I gave is start light. I see a lot of companies jumping in and putting a lot of money in the operation. The thing is, my suggestion is always like outsource as much as you can. It's surprisingly how brands can change. Like the customer that they serve in the US is completely different than the one that they serve here. So for Brazil, a lot of the US brands are luxury brands for us. Like it's not luxury at all in the US, and here it's a luxury thing, right?
Hello and welcome to Brazil is Not for Beginners. Today we are joined by Amanda Martins. Amanda is the founder of LatAm Trampoline, a hands-on go-to-market consultancy. She helps with product launch and go-to-market in Brazil. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm flattered to be here.
You do really amazing work. We've spoken a few times now, and what you do is really, really cool. I think that the audience is going to learn a lot from this conversation. I know I learned a lot talking to you and look to learning more from our conversations. So before we dig into what you do at Trampoline and how you help companies go to market in Brazil, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and really how you got to starting Trampoline, your previous experience and your journey?
Sure. Like I guess my story starts with who I am. As a generalist, I have always done product launches and operation setup throughout my career. I started doing launches for Bacardi. Then I helped establish a PlayStation operations in Brazil. I sold everything I had. I moved to London to pursue my MBA. And during that time, I met the Uber team early on. So I joined Uber in 2015, helping them launching cities. I moved back to Brazil. I helped launching a couple of cities here in Brazil. I spent almost 6 years at Uber. I grew together the company. I was leading like business development teams inside Uber when I decided to become an entrepreneur. I moved back to Brazil in 2021. I led a VC-backed startup for a while. It was a video commerce marketplace. It unfortunately didn't work out for me. But the interesting thing is whenever you are like in a moment, in a typing point in your life, when things don't go as you expected, I guess the most intelligent thing you can do is just talk to people, the relevant people you know that cares about you, because this is what I did. Like I did a list of the people that cared about me and I find like intelligent. And I was just talking about my situation. I didn't know like what's next. And this friend of mine, he just said like, look, Amanda, you just gave me so much advice when I was spending in operations. Now, for instance, I'm expanding to Latin America. Can you do that for me? And I guess that there is a business opportunity in the things that people always ask you. So I helped him, of course, and he referred me to another friend. I realized there was a business there. I created like this. I have 3 major products at this point, which are like analyzes the viability of your business in Brazil or any other Latin American country. I do go-to-market plans, but I also get my hands dirty. If you want, like let's run like an MVP. Let's validate our hypothesis. Let's find like a business partner to represent your company here to do a few tests. So that's why I call my business like a hands-on consultancy. I'm not only like give advice, I also help you like bringing things to life.
That's really, really cool. You talked about where you started your career, and I think you're living every college student's dream, launching video games and alcohol products. So congratulations on that. But I really liked the serendipity of the journey that brought you to Trampoline. You know, we're both in this Latitude Accelerator and obviously know a lot of people in the founding community.
Yeah.
And the advice is always, listen to what gets asked a lot and go after that. What do people need?
Yeah.
Where is their demand, and chase that. And it sounds like in your moment of need, just engaging with people, you heard regular demand or regular need for help entering Latin America. And that's really, really cool. I want to go deeper into what you're doing with Trampoline.
Yeah.
And, you said you help companies launch in Brazil.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that? And building on that, who are you finding is interested in coming to Brazil, and where is the interest in coming to Brazil?
Yeah. I'll start with the obvious answers, like agriculture tax, of course, like Brazil is the major food exporter. And 85% of the agriculture fields in Brazil already use tax solutions. So anyone that works with agriculture tech worldwide is looking at Brazil. But apart from that, like going deeper, there are also like climate tax. So Brazil is one of the cleanest energy countries with 80% of total energy coming from hydro, wind, and solar. So Brazil is also a go-to for climate tax. Crypto, so Brazil is among the top 10 most attractive markets for crypto globally, together with Argentina as well. And smart city solutions, apart from São Paulo and Rio, Brazil has 17 cities with over 1 million inhabitants. So smart city solutions also like look a lot to Brazil and to Latin America. Then I go to not that obvious answers, such as hardware companies. If you look at Brazilian startups, most of them are software companies. So there's a big gap for hardware companies in here. And yeah, and I love helping those sort of solutions. At this moment, I'm helping a company called DEM, and what they do is just like a drone equipped to detect metals, such as lithium, copper, and it's a fantastic solution that saves money, saves times, obviously, but it also enables companies to access inaccessible areas. And also it's environmental friendly. I just find it incredible, and I'm actually like super excited to help bringing it to Latin America. So all those hardware solutions are usually like a big market for them here in Latin America, not only in Brazil. And of course, like consumer companies, we are talking about like a massive population that is not tech sophisticated, but is tech savvy. And we're also
Yeah,
talking about like a country that has really good payments infrastructure. So consumer companies also like look uh, to Brazil with good eyes.
very cool. I think that on this podcast, we have a little bit of a bias towards tech and fintech specifically.
Mhm.
I was a fintech consultant. I'm a fintech nerd. I'm running an insurtech. So there's a little bit of a bias here in some of the conversations more towards finance and investing. But I really love these more hands-on hardware type questions as well. And Brazil is so interesting because it's so large, right? I think this is something that comes up on other podcasts. People don't realize unless you live in Brazil because it's so isolated. You equate Brazil with kind of like a mid-sized country, like a Mexico from the US, you'd think, but it's multiple times the size, population geographically, that different types of cultures that are here. And so
Yeah.
it's really cool. I'd love to hear a little bit more, if you don't mind sharing, on kind of how you go to market with these types of companies. So how do you think about helping a hardware company get started? You talked about running an MVP. So how you get started with a pilot, both with a hardware company and with a software company?
Yeah, of course. Like when I talk about hardware companies, it's intuitive. Like you think that like they're gonna sell a hardware, and not necessarily. Most of them are selling like a service out of this hardware. So it's more tech than you think, and it's more intangible than you think. But as this drone company that I mentioned, like they're selling a service, they are not selling the drone itself, the tech's in the middle. But let's go to the straightforward to a question. Like apart of the MVP part, I think it's important to talk to consumers. Like what I see happening a lot is that what is your target audience in a country might not be in another one. So it's really good to get consumer feedback. I know that sounds obvious, but this gets a lot overlooked. Many times I think people like benchmarking the competition, like talking to potential partners. And when I ask about have you spoken to consumers and they haven't, like it happens a lot. So although
People overlook the obvious sometimes.
exactly.
And you don't want to always talk to a consumer because they might tell you that your product is dumb, and it's the last thing a founder wants, right? Or a company coming to a new market.
Yeah, like hearing candid feedback is not easy. So I guess like this is like my major advice besides of MVPing. I think the first thing is talking to consumers, then MVPing so you can understand what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. When you MVP, you understand what are the nuances, what do you need to localize, what's going to be the effort versus the potential results of this country, right? So you start to landing the business. Another tip that I give is just like start light. I see a lot of companies jumping in and putting a lot of money in the operation. The thing is, my suggestion is always like outsource as much as you can. Sales may not come quickly and you need to expand your runway, right? It's like in a startup. And also when you start like you have more flexibility to adjust what needed to be adjusted. And also all those partners that you were outsourcing, they can serve you for other things. Like they can help you with no local networking. So the most successful launches that I saw were super light, Uber included. And you're just outsourcing a lot of things and understanding what needs to be internal and what can be outsourced, and it's more efficient to be outsourced.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that outsourcing gives you this flexibility. Also, you are a gringo until you're not a gringo anymore. And Isaac, you can feel it like in your own skin. I guess that becoming a local is a process. And this is a process of adjustment, of localizing, and it might take years. It's not something that like, I did this shift and it's now local. It's not like that. So you should educate yourself, but you should also like save resources to product adjustment. Like you cannot like sell a product here in Brazil without offering Pix. Like this is just like over 70% of Brazilians pay using instant payment Pix. So save resources for product adjustments you might need to do. Check pricing. Usually, if
So actually,
yeah.
I want to go deeper on all this. You're giving us
Okay,
really great stuff. I want to go deeper here,
okay,
but maybe taking a step back first. You joked with me that Brazil should have a Ministry of Marketing. We talked a little bit about this already,
yeah,
that Brazil is overlooked in a lot of ways. People don't
yeah.
realize, again, the size of it or the tech savviness of the consumers unless they're already here. And so, two-part question related to that first question I had is kind of why are companies interested in Brazil? And related to that, and I think your point about the Ministry of Marketing is what are some of the misconceptions, both positive and negative, that companies have when they come to Brazil or when they look at Brazil as an opportunity?
Okay, so for the most of the companies I serve, Brazil is not the first country they're expanding. So usually they even get surprised when they discover like how relevant Brazil is. So on the positive side, some of the misconceptions they have is like most of people don't know that Brazilian economy is the ninth biggest one, largest one in the world. This usually comes as a surprise, and how big is the population and how people are open to new technologies and open to foreign technologies, because many countries are super protective and they prefer things that they are from their own nation, and Brazilians are not that, like that. They even like prefer things that are international. uh, on the positive side as well, a lot of things that I see is like how lower the competition is in Brazil versus the US versus Israel. The ecosystem here still offers less competition in comparison to other countries. Talking about high tech solutions, right?
So
Uh,
I didn't want to cut you off, but I'm curious about that lower competition thing and where you think that comes from. Is that reflective of the size of the market and just the size of the opportunity, and so there's more there, or is there something else inherent about Brazil where you think there's less competition?
yeah,
Sorry to come back to the banking sector, but there was the concentration of the banking sector, right? Or
no,
your experience with Uber, where there was these really strong taxi monopolies. So where is that competition piece? Do you think where does that come from?
yeah, I guess like in the fintech sector, this doesn't apply because Brazil like is on the forefront of like promoting regulations for fintechs. We have a really solid like fintech ecosystem. But for everywhere else, apart from fintech, usually there are other countries that like are more advanced than Brazil, right? So for a lot of the solutions that I'm bringing to Brazil, there are not much competition in here. And many times I'm just like, I can't believe there's only one company early stage doing this. And it's really common to see like copycats in Brazil. And you know that some of the major Brazilian unicorns are copycats. So yeah, like I guess that like many times Brazil represents a big market, tech savvy, and that has less competition in comparison to the US. What I see in the US is a super crowded ecosystem when your solution have a really strong competitive advantage. And here, I guess we have more space to test because the total addressable market is so big. And I just see a lot of the entrepreneurs that we have are still people that lived abroad and moved back to Brazil to do something they saw abroad. That's happened to myself. And I saw that happen to a lot of other people.
Yeah, I think when you leave, you realize that something can be different,
Yes.
and that then allows you to think about where the frictions are and how you can change things. And for people that come to Brazil as well, I think my previous guest Ruben mentioned it. Is you start to feel the friction right when you get off the airplane, and the friction is opportunity, and it's a huge market. I think we're beating that into the ground with that comment, but
Yeah.
I don't think people realize it until they actually come and see the extent of the big cities. And I really liked what you mentioned there about all the other cities that have more than a million people. There's lots of big cities beyond Sao Paulo and Rio that people don't even realize,
Yeah.
and a huge consumer market, and not many chain brands, not many
Yeah.
national players in consumer products. and a lot of companies that come in from abroad, which I think is really interesting. I know I cut you off there on the misconceptions. I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to touch on.
No, I've made like a huge list here, but there is like two other things that on the positive side, I have like a big list also on the negative side. But like on the positive side, there is something that I want to mention, which is like Brazil is a hacking is part of Brazilian culture. We have something called jeitinho brasileiro. It's just like finding a way. We also mean outsmarting the system and being creative. So I find hacking, and I work in other 6 countries. I find hacking easier in Brazil.
For
Like,
sure.
yeah, we even have like a regulatory sandbox where like companies that doesn't have a regulation yet can operate without being forbidden. So by law, it's easier. And also like hacking and giving away, and like it's easier here. It's well seen here, you know. It's part of our culture, I would say. So this is also like something that takes people by surprise, and I think it's something on the positive side. But I'm ready to talk on the negative side if you are ready to.
Yeah, you said you had another couple there. One thing that you mentioned earlier as well, and I don't know if it's going to come up in the positive or the negative side, but something that I come back to regularly is the disconnect between pure science and applied science.
Hmm.
And so I think that it comes down to the incentive structure
Yeah,
in academia, if I understand it correctly, that
yeah,
professors at schools and departments are more incentivized to publish papers than to create businesses out of them. But I think related to that is what you talked about in terms of the climate tech and the energy space is there's actually a lot of really abundant and inexpensive energy in Brazil, which I think people don't realize as well. But
yeah.
I am not sure how you feel about that comment I made about the difference between pure and applied science and the opportunities that fit there. And I guess how that relates to your negative misconceptions.
Yeah, like actually, like I think this is like a big opportunity for R&D companies that are moving in. Like what I've seen, I haven't worked with R&D, but I've seen like, and I advise a few. I think that they have like a big competitive advantage wherever they are coming to Brazil because of that gap. So yeah, I think that you have to shift the lens and see these challenges as opportunities. On the negative side, things that are commonly overlooked that I see, there are a few things that like you already mentioned on your podcast, and I don't want it to be repetitive for your most loyal audience, such as a challenge to say no. Like Brazilians may say yes because they wanted to please you, they don't really mean it, you know, like this was already said, and I don't want to dig much about it. Also, 1% of Brazilians speak English, and this may come out as a surprise because in Mexico the percentage is much higher than that. And also, I think this is commonly overlooked when you say like 1%. People don't think that's going to be that challenging, but it is. On a day by day, I see how hard it is. But
I think part of that is that also a lot of that 1% is concentrated in Rio and Sao Paulo. And so you make the assumption when you come here
yeah,
and you deal with people in Rio and Sao Paulo at big companies that speak English, that it's going to be easy to go out. And then you go out to
yeah.
Uberlândia or Campinas or other places and it's more difficult.
And even you go out of the business world, like you talk to doctors here and they don't speak English, right? It's harder to find people who speak English in here, like outside of the business world. And even like in the business world, what I see is like many times people say they speak English, and then we start a meeting and they don't, you know, they're just like giving their best, and they're really struggling. And during that meeting, I think this is something overlooked. And honestly, what I do is just working with translators. When I see that the language is just like making that business to not happen, I'm just like suggest people to hire a translator. Like it still works. One thing that I haven't heard in your podcast yet about a negative surprise that people have when they come to Brazil. Again, this is obvious, but it's overlooked. So a lot of the gringos, the Americans, the Europeans companies that I bring here, they have different policies for defaults that might be like too light for Brazil. Here in Brazil, 40% of Brazilian population has some kind of debt. So like we don't have such things as a credit score as you have in the US. Like there's no background. There's only Serasa, and they only say if you have a debt or no. If you pay your debt, they don't have any background of you anymore, right? So
They're changing that, hopefully,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's in the process, but
yeah,
it's very early and
exactly,
yeah, something to be aware of for sure.
exactly. Something to be aware, and sometimes it's just like increasing more penalties to a contract is like just a quick fix that can save you a lot of money. Also, like on the negative side, there's one thing that I think is the most important one. Brazilians are price sensitive. If you're bringing a product from the US, from Europe to Brazil, chances are it might be too salty to work here. So for the many of the companies that are served, Brazil is a market of tighter margins, but with a bigger scale. So it pays off on scale, you know. So for a lot of the companies that I serve at the moment, this is the case. And I think this is something that a lot of companies struggle. And many of the companies that I saw that gave up on Brazil, their mistake was specifically on pricing, understanding where to position in their brand and how to price for Brazilians and to give up some margin and bet on volume. I guess like this is something that you should keep in mind if you decide to come to the Brazil market.
Very neat. I think that's a really interesting comment. And we talked about it actually a little bit as we were getting ready to start the podcast, that you had gone back and listened to some of the previous episodes recently to refresh yourself. And you had liked where Gustavo Camargo at Bain talked about Brazil being two countries, being
Oh, yeah.
Canada and then another country.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that differs when you think about selling to, I guess, the more affluent market versus the rest of the country. And I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that and kind of where price sensitivity lies in those two.
Yes. So just to recap for the ones who haven't heard to Gustavo Camargo episode, what he talks about is that Brazil AB class, so the top of the pyramid in Brazil, is equivalent in size and average income to Canada.
Yeah,
So there are multiple Brazils inside Brazil.
I love that statistic.
Yeah. So the thing is, what I've noticed is that like if you're gonna have like a massive product, you need to do it right away. Like you need to understand like what's the pricing that is gonna make you scale, and then Brazilian scale back. But for like more high-end products, I think it applies, but it depends on the product. And also it depends on the audience. Is it luxury? Like it's really hard to generalize. I agree. Like if you're looking for high end, there are a few solutions that might not be the case. But usually, for instance, for SaaS B2B, companies here in Brazil are pretty much more cost conscious than they are in Europe and in the US. This is what I think for SaaS B2B tech solutions, right?
Very neat. So you've done over 30 product launches here in Brazil, I guess in the last year, right? Or in the last year and a half. I don't remember if I'm getting it right
Mhm.
here.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of best practice, in terms of leading to a successful launch or leading to a successful market entry? We talked about a couple of these things, and I pulled it back because I wanted to get a little bit of the context left. But
Yeah.
without telling us all your secrets, maybe give us some hints so that people want to call you and go deeper.
Yeah, like I guess I have three major secrets. MVP before jumping in. So I already talked about it. Talk to customers. Maybe find a partner to sell your product in Brazil for a few months so you can understand the market. Start light. And my third suggestion, my third tip is like localization. And we start talking about educating, about saving resources to make product adjustment, check pricing, validate your assumptions, and look if the early birds, if the early adopters that you were considering are really the best early adopters for you in Brazil. Like it's surprisingly how brands can change. Like the customer that they serve in the US is completely different than the one that they serve in here. So if for Brazil, a lot of the US brands are luxury brands for us. Like it's not luxury at all in the US, and here it's a luxury thing, right?
Yeah,
So maybe you're just serving the wrong audience. So that's why I think it's important also to MVP. Like I think MVP and localizing have like an intimate relationship.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I remember the first time that I lived in Brazil, the perception of Korean cars was something that stood out to me a lot. In the US, they were much more mass market
Mm-hmm.
cars.
Mm-hmm.
And coming here, some of them bordered on luxury cars.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really surprised at that. I wasn't used to it. I was used to seeing a Kia. And no offense to Kias, that they're also really good cars. But the perception of coming to the US market and competing with the American cars and the European cars, they were behind the Japanese cars and behind these other cars.
Yeah.
And then coming to Brazil, the perception was different. There was more value placed in the brand. And I think that's a really great point. I'd love, if you don't mind, maybe picking on those 3 points, if you could go deeper on them, and if there's any stories that come to mind to provide a little bit more tangibility to the audience on points that you touched on there.
Yes, I can talk about my startup. Like my startup was a copycat of a company that I saw in the US, actually. There is a company called Chop Shops. They go to outlets and they do a curatorship of the best deals, the best products with the really good prices, and they sell it for video. So it's showrooming, reverse showrooming, right? You are bringing people from the online to the store. And I found it genius. Brazilians, there are two things that match a lot of Brazilians, which is WhatsApp and outlets. If you go to outlets in the US, it's just like packed with Brazilians, right?
And Century 21.
Yeah, exactly. So I decided to copy this idea, and they're tailored for like 20, 30 years old, really cool women that like are professionals that don't have time to shop, to go to shopping, right? So I saw myself in that position and I thought, well, it's fantastic. Like I'm gonna do something similar. I was just doing creatorship in outlets in Brazil and the US and selling through video. This is amazing. And we are targeting this like younger woman. But what we realized that who was joining our lives were just like Sonia, Maria Aparecida. Those are names of moms in Brazil. So I realized that audience wasn't who I thought. And then I started interviewing, I started talking to my customers, right, as I suggested.
So important.
Yeah, and surveying them, like, and 60% of the women that were like joining the lives in my app, they were over 50 years old. And what I realized is that those sort of women, they are not going out every day, they're staying more at home. Many times they live in the countryside of Brazil and they don't have access to the stores I was showcasing in the lives. And also, they are the shopper of the house. They are buying presents not only for them, but for the whole family. So I guess like many times you are shooting one side and you end up like going the other way. That's the importance of MVP, just because you have something in the paper, but every time that you're gonna execute it, there are like multiple other variables that you haven't considered. That's why when I created like a go-to-market consultancy, I thought it was super important. I also had the other side because it's really easy to suggest. I guess it's much harder to execute and understand which assumptions were wrong and what we should do differently.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was a consultant for a number of years and wrote a lot of reports and gave a lot of suggestions. And one of the reasons I started a business was because I wanted to get my hands dirtier and actually live through it. Because, like you said, it's easy to give suggestions, but harder to actually realize it. On that point, you talked a little bit about the market entry piece. You talked a little bit about the MVP and the importance of doing that, talking to customers. You've talked about the price sensitivity a few times. Are there any hacks or any tricks that you give to people on doing pricing in Brazil, on thinking through how they understand pricing here?
Yeah, because many times, for instance, if you're a B2B company, your client travels, right? So sometimes you're just creating like a product for Brazil. Like mainly if your solution is a tech solution, it's easier to do. Like do a simpler product to Brazil, like an entry product. I think it works. Also, freemium works a lot in Brazil. Brazilians love to feel they are outsmarting the system.
They love a deal.
Exactly. So they love to feel like they were more clever than you know. So you create a solution that gives them that impression. This is definitely something that is gonna have a biggest appealing here in the market. So freemium works really well.
So I actually do have a more specific question that's come up. You mentioned some of the misconceptions or the things that people overlook, and you talked about the debt piece. But I think another one that's really interesting that actually hasn't really come up yet so far on this podcast is the use of installment payments and how Brazilians like dealing with parcelamento in Portuguese, right? So pay in 12, pay in 6, pay in 3. In the US and other markets, there's companies like Klarna and Affirm that are buy now, pay later. It's been in Brazil for years.
Yeah,
Companies came to Brazil trying to do buy now, pay later, and they all left because it's so ingrained in the culture.
yeah,
How do foreign companies adapt to that? How should they plan for that? Because it does affect your financial modeling and
yeah.
how you're gonna make money and realize those gains.
Yeah, exactly. Like coming back to my point, where like many times Brazil is a good market in terms of volume, not in terms of margins. I haven't worked yet to a client that had this problem, like to pay installments, because I work a lot of tech solutions, to be honest. Like the only client that I had that we had to pay installments was PlayStation, but it was a big corporate that I was used to work in Brazil. But yeah, this is something to be mindful of. And honestly, this is overlooked, but a lot of the people that I serve at this point already knew that Brazilians pay in installments because this is the same in other places in Latin America. This is the same also in Mexico. Like there's something that are particular for Brazil, and there are some things that are different than the rest of Latin, I guess.
That makes sense. Continuing on this, we've talked a lot about what companies need to do to succeed. What have you seen in terms of companies that have not succeeded? So, where have companies failed in their entries to Brazil?
Timing. I guess like a lot of companies, as I mentioned, like don't take Brazil as a priority. Like the US usually expand first, for instance, to UK or Canada because of the language. Chinese companies usually prioritize Southeast Asia, right? So Brazil is usually not prioritized. And what happens is that other people here create copycats, and when you decide to join the market, it's already too late. This happened to Uber Eats, for instance, Uber Eats versus iFood.
Interesting.
So I guess that there is a big power in the blue ocean finding a market without the solution yet and being the first mover. And many times, a lot of the brands that I see that like fail in Brazil fail because of timing. Also, like there's the one thing that is tricky, which is competition. And you even like interrupt me when I was saying that Brazil has less competition because Brazil has less competition for a few markets. And if you're doing high tech, right? But if your product is not high tech, I've seen a lot of people like underestimating the local competition. The thing is, if there's somebody else already doing the same thing as you are in Brazil, chances are they have like bigger competitive advantage than you because they are Brazilians. They have no local network, local knowledge. Like you're moving to a new country, which you don't know a thing, and you don't have local networking, and you don't have a competitive advantage. So I've seen companies fail because they're underestimating their local competitors, and this is just the clear situation as it is. Also, one important thing to say is underestimating local bureaucracy. Big advice that I gave is like don't save money with lawyers. Like those are good investments.
And accountants.
Yeah, lawyers, accountants, and at this point there are like plenty of like B2B startups that are catering this sort of problem in Brazil. I guess like it's really good to hire those local expertise. I mean, the government is trying, like we have like a tax reform. Also, like the days to open a subsidiary in Brazil will reduce. It used to be 45 days. At this point, it's among 3 to 7 days. So the government is working to reduce bureaucracy, but still like super complex. And also another thing that I saw that like make companies fail in Brazil is like not mapping risks in advance, which I think is a lot related to MVP because when you MVP, you are seeing like everything that can go wrong. Like I see a lot of companies like ignoring country related risks. And many times they're not doing this because they don't know it. They're just doing this because they need to move fast, right? But this can lead to a lot of like problems. Like Brazil has currency fluctuations. We have safety issues. We have a few issues that you may not have coming from the US or coming from another country. So those things shouldn't be overlooked. And I think that many times they are. And people create like different expectations and like crazy forecasts that would never come true in here. But because they have like their own assumptions that come from somewhere else, they thought that they were unsuccessful. And many times, like I think that success and fail, they're like brothers, right? You are
Yeah.
just failing because you haven't tried enough or you haven't tried differently. So I've seen companies also like having the sensation that their solution didn't work for Brazil, but when I saw it, it's more like they didn't did it well. Like their launch was not well thought.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. And obviously, we can hear that you come from a startup background of iterating and MVPing and learning as you go, which I think is really important in Brazil in general. You talked about that hacking culture, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Looking forward, what kinds of companies do you think are well placed to enter Brazil? Who in the audience should start preparing their Brazil strategy, and who do you expect to be hearing from after this comes out in terms of people wanting to enter Brazil?
So I guess that there are massive problems everywhere in Brazil, like companies that solve a clear problem with simple UX and that need to scale are generally like a really good fit for Brazil. Our ecosystem here in Brazil is packed with fintechs, B2B SaaS fintechs, and there are multiple markets such as climate techs, mobility, agriculture techs. There are a lot of opportunity for those sort of companies because there are like big markets here in Brazil that are unfortunately underserved.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, heading towards the end here, what does the expression Brazil is not for beginners mean to you?
Yeah, Brazil is not an intuitive country. We are a diverse country full of contradictions. So we are party people, and at the same times we are religious. We are extremely creative, but we have little education. We are urban, but 80% of our exports come from commodities. The population is tech savvy, but there's still a lot of bureaucracy involved in creating tech in Brazil. So I often hear from my foreign friends that a lot of the things in Brazil don't make sense. I think it's really hard to understand those counterintuitive things because when you hear one side of the story, you assume the other, right? Like you hear somebody, how can a person being like a party person and a religious person, like it's just like all this contrasenses that we have in Brazil. Like I think those are things that make Brazil really complex for outsiders.
And for Brazilians, I think it's a country of extremes on
Yeah,
all sides. I think is something that I always tell people is it's the best place and the worst place at the same time, and
yeah.
that creates lots of opportunity, but also obviously lots of challenges. And I think that that makes a lot of sense. I always like to end the podcast by asking people if there's an expression or a behavior or some sort of unique trait that they think foreigners should understand, or maybe in the work that you've done, bringing so many companies to Brazil and launching that you've seen that stands out to foreigners and you want to have an opportunity to explain.
Yeah, I would love to take time in this question. I would love to mention, of course, I give my 2 cents in terms of the expression, but also, like, I have a infinite list of like behaviors
Go for it.
that surprise outsiders. So, regarding the expression, an expression that I love and I think that translates a lot of the Brazilian personality is "Tamo junto, galera," which means we are together in this. I think it translates the collaborative approach Brazilians have in general, the positivity and the welcoming atmosphere that you're gonna find here. So you can even write just TMJ, right? Tamo junto. And it's something that like I just had like two friends from the UK here in Brazil, and they were just noticed how much people say that. It's something that you can hear on a daily basis, and it's something that translates a lot about Brazilian personality.
Yeah, it's a great expression. Lots of, GIFs and icons and WhatsApp and things like that around it as well.
Yeah, talking about WhatsApp, like the it goes like let's go to the behaviors that surprise outsiders. WhatsApp in general is something that surprised. Not that like 92% of Brazilians use WhatsApp, but the fact that they use WhatsApp for business purpose, and also the fact that they send WhatsApp audios. Like most of my clients are just like
Yeah, yeah.
surprised that
The bane of my existence. It's terrible.
And people usually say, I'm going to send an audio because it's easier. Like it's easier just for the person who is sending, right? It's really hard to understand through the audio, mainly if you're not like a native Brazilian Portuguese speaker. And yeah, this is something really common here in Brazil, like WhatsApp audios. Uh, Lunch meetings. So I guess this is true everywhere, but you have to have a personal connection to do really good business here in Brazil. And lunch is the main meal for us, and it's really common here in Brazil those 2 hour lunches because we're launching and doing business, right? I guess most of my clients I catch by surprise with them, like we are here for almost 2 hours, and I said yes, but like this meeting is good. So in the end, like this is gonna be like a positive outcome. Also, like by bringing my clients to restaurants, right? They can eat like sushi, Italian or Arabic food, salad, rice and beans at the same place. I guess they were surprised like on how diverse we are and how diverse is our food, maybe and sometimes at the same place, right?
Yeah, the diversity thing stands out to people. I think it hits them. The size of the different immigrant populations and the
Yeah,
way they've integrated into the society.
yeah, the number of beauty salons always surprises. Like we have one beauty salon per corner in Brazil. If you work in the beauty sector, Brazil is definitely like a market to look at. We prioritize aesthetic treatments, and that translates like in the amount of beauty clinics that you can find everywhere. And I think this is something that usually people first time visiting Brazil notice. The concept of a motor taxi also has surprised a lot of clients. So because we have traffic, motorcycle usually like is the fastest way to move in the city.
Yes.
And we have the concept of a motor taxi, so you getting in a motor, which is not safe at all. But I have foreign friends and clients that like try it and loved it, but it's a lot of adventures.
They just want the experience.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess like superstitions, Brazil has many superstitions to make money, to travel, to have luck. And you can even see that like while doing business with Brazilians. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
One
I,
of the first things I learned from my mother-in-law was lua cheia, enche minha carteira, when there's a full moon out there. So when there's a full moon, you say that to the moon and it brings you wealth. So
yeah.
lots of things like that. But
Yeah.
Amanda, really, really cool. This was awesome. Thank you so much for all of the insights. I know we kept it high level, but there's so much more we could have dug into. How can people reach you at LatAm Trampoline if they want to get in touch and know about the services you offer or just connect to learn about entering Brazil?
Fantastic. So my LinkedIn is Amanda Martins, but you can also access my company's website, which is latentrampoline.com, and you can contact me through that as well.
Excellent. Amanda, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. We should do it again and go deeper into all of these things.
Thank you. Tamo junto.
Tamo junto. Thanks again for joining us. This podcast was hosted by me, Isaac Matzner. It was produced by Amanda Villela and edited by Veronica Medina. You can find more episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as on our Substack page. We love feedback, so please feel free to reach out to us on social media or via email at Brazil4beginners@gmail.com.